we're going to have a subsequent part of this series on the houses of Chase Road. Selected one, you can't do them all, so you pick the ones you have information for, and hopefully some other time you do the rest of them. And before I get into that, we're really very pleased to receive an award from the Dartmouth Grange number 162, that's the local Dartmouth Grange, the other night. And I'd like to read what that award says, because I think we should be very proud to have this award. This is nice recognition. Dartmouth Grange number 162 presents Community Citizen Award to the Dartmouth Historical and Arts Society in recognition of outstanding service to this community and mankind. Your dedication to the preservation and teaching of local history and cultural diversity in Dartmouth, Massachusetts is profoundly and sincerely acknowledged by the members of Dartmouth Grange number 162, given this 3rd day of April 2018. Master Elizabeth Newton and lecturer Sarah Cogswell. Master Newton is here. It's really a nice award. We're going to put it on the wall. We're going to get it framed. We actually have a little miniature house with the award on it, on a plaque, and we'll also put that probably on the fireplace later on. And Bob's going to get my picture for the courier. Thank you. Tonight, I have this talk is going to be in 2 sections. The first section is going to be short looks at a selection of houses of Smith Mills, some of which I think you'll find kind of interesting. And the second one is an in-depth look at 2 houses, one of which is a house I call a star-crossed house, a la Shakespeare. You remember star-crossed lovers, Romeo and Juliet. This is a star-crossed house. So to begin, we have a projectionist who's going to be pushing buttons for me. Donald, you're our man on the projection. And this first section is the selected short looks at Smith Mills houses. And the first scene is on the corner of Tucker Road and State Road. And this is a kind of a rare picture that we haven't seen before, but if you notice, that's a watering trough that we haven't had. And I was informed, I've heard this before, but I forgot about it, that actual little pile of stone with the hardware is now located in Smith Mills Landing.
The hardware is with it.
No hardware, just the stones. And Pascomanset Landing was donated by Brian Hawes, son of Thomas Hawes, son of Simeon Hawes, son of Sylvanus Hawes, who owned half of Smith Mills at one time when they came from Lund's Corner. Old Simeon Hawes came from Lund's Corner. Next slide, please, Don. At that corner, and you will see these little cutouts that I've used. These are cutouts from Smith Mills, the old Dartmouth Historical Society sketch done by Henry Worth. And he wrote a very nice piece on Smith Mills, and it included details about houses and how the land passed. That house where that pump is right in front of the house is still there, and it's at the corner of Tucker Road. And the owners have been, 1842, David Wilson, John and Benjamin Cummings, Amos Cornell, Odo Snow. The heirs of William Cummings sold it to David M. and Eunice Miller. That was in 1908 when he wrote that. After that, I didn't trace it. Next slide, please. Now, just to give you an idea, this is the 1895 map of Smith Mills blown up. And this little, see where I put the arrow, that says watering trough. And there it is right there on the map. So of course, this map gives you all the properties. There's the grist mill and so forth and so on. I'm not going to talk about all of these properties. You don't have the time tonight. But we have material on all this stuff, and sometime we have a marathon meeting we'll talk about. Next slide, please, Donald. This is an earlier map of Smith Mills, and again, you'll see, I wanted you to see the Cummings, because we'll be talking about them later in the evening. Cummings store, the Cummings house. You got B. Cummings Benjamin, W. Cummings William. There's a younger Benjamin, an older Benjamin, and so on. And of course, you'll also see other names like Winslow, Friends Churches. So next slide, please, Don. This is 58. Next slide. It's basically the same, 2 years difference. This is a mill built by John Cummings, one of the sons of the Cummings family, and this is Worth Smith Mills is my reference to that document, telling at the beginning at the south end of Four Corners at the store, next east across the river, is now a stone mill built by the Cummings about 1848. Nice looking thing. Unfortunately, part of what we're going to talk about is the history of these places. There's the history of that mill. That's what this town did to that mill. And this is the old Connie store, which was Jacobson's store, and Thatcher's store before that. Okay, next slide, John. That's just more pictures of, that was 1970 when they knocked it down. Next slide. Okay, next we're going to talk about Pascomanset Links Clubhouse. I didn't say there'll all be dwelling houses. The clubhouse, I spent many years in the clubhouse when I worked there. So next slide. That's what it looked like. And at Halloween, we would put things up on the roof. Some of the kids would, unbeknownst to the Hawes. And I worked in that clubhouse for a lot of years and played a lot of golf there. Next slide, please. This is what it looked like back in the 30s. There's the clubhouse back there. And this is Winston King's garage over there. I don't know if any... Jeff, you're not a Winston King family member.
David King on Bakerville Road.
Yeah, okay. And this is a guy named Duclos. And Donald tells me that that house, that building that the gas station office was in, has been moved up to Carrollton Heights. So we're talking about history of stuff. That's one of the things. This man's son used to play golf with me at the reservation. Okay, next slide, please. And this is a scene inside the clubhouse. This is one of my high school classmates. That's Simeon Hawes, who managed the golf course. And believe it or not, I used to have hair. That's me. Okay, next slide, please. That's 54. So it took me a long time to lose it. But this is another scene that shows the putting green. It gives you an idea of the location. Down and back over here was the Fairway Restaurant, also known as the Manset Diner at one time. And great place. Lots and lots of people played golf there. Next slide, please. This is what was left of it back in the 1960s when they started to build the mall. They took the clubhouse off of its foundation. These are trees that Douglas Hawes and I planted along the fairways. I watered every summer one hot summer. But they're still there. That's one thing that's left. Next slide, Don. The clubhouse has been moved over to Summit Grove. If any of you know Ray Peck, that's Ray Peck's house. Ray's dead now, but I think his widow still lives there. But you see the top, that's where the sign was on the clubhouse. Next slide, Don. Now we're going to move on to the Sylvanus T. Hawes house. Sylvanus was the son of an older Simeon who came from Lund's Corner, bought sawmill properties. And the property that the Sylvanus T. Hawes house is on was actually, later on, it was the golf course. And this gives you the string of ownership. And again, this is Worth's work, not my work. I just borrowed it. But it says in 1908, it was owned, this is when he wrote this. It had come from Isaac Miller to Simeon Hawes, and then Simeon Hawes' son, Sylvanus. And he had a son, Simeon, who was in that picture on the golf course. The old part of that house, comprising one room and the chamber over it, was built by Elishib Smith between 1730 and 1740. Elishib Smith is one of the Smiths for whom Smith Mills was named. So next slide, please. That's what it looked like back in the early days. And these are some of the Sylvanus Hawes' kids. Among them, Mrs. Levi King was one of those Hawes, and Simeon Hawes, the manager of the golf course, and Clayton Hawes and Roy Hawes and a whole bunch of them, a younger Sylvanus Haas and so forth. But that's a very nice, and you'll see the similarity. Next slide, Donald. That's the same house, but many years later when it was a golf course. And the same features are all still there, but now it's white and so on. I've been in the house, very steep staircase. There's a barn in back, a beautiful oak framed barn and stuff. All gone, all gone. This is kind of like a follow-on to, remember we got a big poster around here somewhere, Gone But Not Forgotten. That's the unfortunate story about Smith Mills properties. Okay, next slide, Donald. The old North Dartmouth Library, next slide. You all remember what that looks like down in Tucker Road, or off Tucker Road on State Road. The Job Gidley's daughters used to work in that library when I was a kid, and earlier than that. That still exists, but the Tucker Road project is going through there, and we're not too sure, that's what I got these here for, why that's going to, what's going to happen to those. It'd be nice if we saved them. There are different ideas, and we'd like to save them, but it takes more than liking to make it happen. Next slide, please, Don. Now, there's more than one William Cummings house. William Cummings was one of Benjamin Cummings' 3 sons, and he was the one that never married, so he had multiple properties, and when he died, left tons of money to his nieces and nephews. But in this map of 1871, you'll see the William Cummings residence was here. You know it as the Cecil Smith House. And this is the Pierce House. And again, you'll see, this is a house we're going to talk about later on in the evening. That's at 1871, John Cummings was dead, and his widow, Mrs. Cummings, Elizabeth, was living there. She still owned the property over here, and the land on which the Christian church, some people call it the Christian Baptist Church, but I've been informed that it's not ever been a Baptist church, even though Henry Worth thought it was. He documented it as a Baptist church. But it was right there. And that was the mother church of the church that is now down on Anderson Way and has been remodeled to a bigger church and so forth. And again, you'll see the schoolhouse was here, and a friend's meeting house was here. There's another friend's meeting house over here. So next slide, Don. This is the former William Cummings house and former Cecil Smith house. Next slide. Okay, now as you go along the north side of the State Road, Henry Worth described things like this. Next east of the store lot was a tract that extended to the old schoolhouse lot, a distance about 450 feet, which in 1929 was conveyed by Jonathan Wood and wife to Abijah Packard. Packards came to town when they built some mills. They were mill builders. It was conveyed to Henry Packard in 1832 and became his homestead. When they failed, they had a financial problem, and everything got given to assignees. The property was sold to William Cummings and became his homestead. So that's why we call it the William Cummings homestead. Next slide. And this is the next one, which is another one of the houses. And this one still stands. Smith House is gone. That got demolished, along with a lot of others. But this one still stands. And this is what some of you know as the Pierce House. Mayor Pierce of New Bedford, his family lived in here. And Nancy Cavallo, who was a Pierce, lived in here. She was a great collector of historical documents and photographs, and I've got her collection, and got it all scanned, and we'll be making it available on our website sooner or later. Next slide, please, Don.
Does this house turn 90 degrees?
Yes.
Yeah, probably.
So that there now is facing west. That front of the house there is now facing west.
Right, that's correct. I believe that's correct.
East?
No. East is up the hill.
Door faces the fire station.
Right, that's east.
I have the house. I think the front door is on the other side.
Well, I don't know. We can go get a picture of it and find out. Next slide, please. This is another picture. This is old Mrs. Pierce, Stell Pierce, Nancy's mother. And she ran something called the Tea Garden at Smith Mills, on Route 6 between Fall River and New Bedford. And I don't know who Helen was, might have been another daughter. But that's a drawing of the house, 31 and 32. Next slide, please. Prices were pretty good. Tea Garden Special was a tea, hot or iced, with assorted sandwiches and cake, 35 cents. With coffee, 40 cents. And if you had a pot of tea or coffee or milk, cocoa, iced tea, all a dime. Pretty good prices. Been a little inflation since then. Next slide, please. Now we're going to move up one lot toward the country club. Purchase of the schoolhouse lot. And again, this is Worth saying this. And I've checked out what Worth said. Most of what Worth said was quite accurate. If you check stuff out, he's pretty good. Was made by school district number 14 in 1843 from Seth Maxfield, who was one of Don's cousins, I believe. The Maxfields got connections with the Maxfields. Next slide, John. And that's what it looked like. That's a really nice picture of it. Very old picture. And it's up on a hill. There was an outhouse, so one of those is an outhouse and so forth. Next slide, please. And that's a drawing that was on one of the old maps. Remember one of those, like the 1858 map of Dartmouth? They had a bunch of little drawings around the edges. That's one of them. And this one's got a cow in the front yard. Yep.
There are two doors.
Two doors, girls' side and the boys' side. Oh yeah, in those days.
Who was segregated to?
Well, I'm not sure about once you get inside, but I think the playgrounds were segregated, I believe. At least they were when I was a kid, and that's a lot longer than that. So it's just, and we had cows cutting the grass, very efficient grass mowing. Yep, Pam?
Is that where the fire barn is today?
That's right in that area, yes. I'm not sure precisely if it's on that site, but it's in that general area. Next slide, Don. This is another house, the Carrie and Abby Potter house. That's a unique looking structure, not there anymore. Next slide, please. Now there's a house called the Tavern House on many documents. Next slide, Don. And again, using Worth as our source. It's on the east side of the east outlet of the pond. Trying to get you, the pond is on the north side of State Road. There's two outlets. One is the west outlet, one is the east outlet. The east outlet is near the country club, up that side. And so when it comes under the road, now we're on the other side of the road in State Road. East side of the east outlet of the pond is a double house that for years was the Village Tavern. The land was set off to Timothy Maxfield. Set off meaning originally he was the first time it was laid out was to Maxfield.
That was 1700s, early 1700s.
It doesn't give a date.
That could be like a grandson or something like
Yeah. Doesn't give a date, but in 1818 it got to Hillette Gifford. Never know. Don't know that Gifford.
Hallett Gifford, I think. I've heard the name.
Hallett? Not H-I? H-A? Oh, okay. 1821, Benjamin Cummings. That's the older Benjamin Cummings, the father of the three sons. William, one of the oldest sons. Abigail Packard, Isaac Gideon Howland, Jonathan Cullen, da-da. Finally, John Cummings, Sylvanus T. Hawes. Remember, he's the guy that operated the sawmill. And the present house that's still there was built in 1820 by Gifford. And from 1831, it's been used as a tavern. Next slide. This is what it looked like. Double house. See the door here, two sides of it. I've got another picture of this, and there's some people in the yard. The next slide, Don. You can see them kind of got a horse going in the barn in the back there. But the double chimney and so on. Gone. Next slide, please. There it goes. Going, gone. Right? It's going. The house next door eventually went too. Okay, next slide. The Baptist Meeting House. Not really a Baptist meeting house, but Henry Worth described it as a Baptist meeting house. I think they did use the rite of baptism, but probably went in the river for doing that. And you've all heard the story about Macumba, the quahogger, clamor. When he went down, in the name of the Father, in the name of the Son, Name of the Holy Ghost. When he came up, he had a clam in his hand. That was in the Coxet River, not that river. You never heard that before? I told that here before. This is the inscription on the picture of the meeting house, and you see some people standing outside there. Must be before or after service. And this is the inscription on the Palmer picture. Smith Mills Baptist Meeting House, built about 1838. Next slide. Okay, this is another description, starting again at the southwest of the Four Corners, which stands a small Christian Baptist meeting house. That's Worth's words. The land was owned by Cummings and descended to Elizabeth Cummings. The meeting house was built in 1835 to 1840, they're not sure, by village contributions, but no deed was ever given to the land. It still remains, remember, still meaning when he wrote this, 1908, in the Cummings. I don't know who, I think the bank owns the land now. There's a bank there now. The house itself, I don't have a picture of it. Next slide, Don. But that house is not gone. It got moved up the street on the west side of Old Westport Road, and is what is known as the Stephen Grace House. It doesn't look like the meeting house anymore. It's been raised up and so on, but that's what happened to it. Now we come to another house, the Thomas Weaver Andrusela House, Cedar Dell, UMass campus. Next slide, please. I think you've all seen what that looks like. We've talked about it here many times. We're still trying to lobby the university to save it, not put it in gone but not forgotten category. Next slide. This is what it looked like when the UMass took the land from the Zalas. This is probably a little facility for keeping the milk cool. And this is right on the pond, Cedar Dell Pond, not far from my house, actually. Next slide, Don. What's going to happen to that? I hope we have some influence. Okay, next slide. There are 3 Friends meeting houses in Smith Mills. Lots of people don't realize that. Forgetting the Apponeganset meeting house, that's not Smith Mills. But in Smith Mills, if you know where the Bank of America bank is located, there's a burial ground in the back, and that's where the Newtown Meeting House was located. And that burial ground went with that Newtown Meeting House. That doesn't show, it's up in here somewhere. But right there is the Friends Meeting House on the State Road that got moved up to Deerfield. And over here, there's a Friends Church. See, this says Friends Church? That is right next to what eventually became the Gidley School. It later became the Edwards House, and I believe that house is still there. It was a Friends Meeting House. So 3 Friends Meeting Houses in Smith Mills. You think there were Quakers in Smith Mills? I think so. Next slide. Okay, this is describing the State Road Friends Meeting House. Again, this is Worth. Next east is lot stands on which stands the Wilbur Friends Meeting House. The Wilburites were a branch of the Quakers. They got into different segments, different elements, and said, I'm going my own way, and did that. In 1845, some guy named Simmons sold us to Perry Gifford. Those Giffords were everywhere, Richard. I'm telling you. They were everywhere. Overseer of the Friends meeting got it from, Benjamin Tucker got it from Perry Gifford. And the Tucker family in Smith Mills became Wilburites. And I think the Wilburites were the more conservative of the Quaker groups. And they built their own meeting house and their own cemetery up on the corner of Chase Road and Old Westport Road. Next slide, please. This is what it looked like back along. There's an earlier slide without this little roof on it, this roof here. But that's what it looked like then. It's still in one piece, but it got moved in pieces up to Deerfield. And it's up there, you can go visit it. Next slide is a picture of it. This is the reconstructed meeting house in Deerfield. And I've got many, many other pictures, but I didn't put them all in here. I'd like to finish this thing. Next slide, Don. Okay. That's the same deal. Oh, no, sorry. This is down on Tucker Road, and this is the piece of land just north of the Gidley School lot. And this is the lot purchased by Dartmouth Friends in 1827 from another Maxfield. And here was built a meeting house. I have no pictures of that meeting house, but you can see it on the map as an outline. In 1889, the lot was sold to Charles A. Cornell. I believe the name is Edwards that had it later, but I'm not positive. Next slide, please, Don. Now, this is another interesting verbal description of a house on the road. It stood on the east side of Tucker Road, land purchased in 1819 from another one of Donald's cousins, John Chase, which is the south part of Maxfield land. The rest of the land out to New Bedford Road, Dr. Winslow purchased in 1829. He's a medical doctor. In the New Bedford Mercury of August 1823 appears the statement that the house of Dr. O.P. Winslow at Smith Mills was struck by lightning and his wife was killed. So I've told you, I'll give you a little history of some houses. Okay, next slide. There's a lot of tragedy going on. This is the last slide of this first batch, and I'm going to have to set up the next set. But this is a house that was up on Hicksville Road above the railroad track, and it was also still in one piece, built in 1718, nice old house, and it's been moved to Jordan Road. And I can't remember the name of the guy that moved it, but I know somebody. Andy Burns, right. And he was pretty active in helping us negotiate with DNRT about the Helfand House. And he's a real lover of historic properties. The house, I think you can probably drive by it and take a picture of what it looks like now. I haven't, but okay, I'm going to take 2 minutes to set up the next batch of slides. The two houses we're going to talk about in depth are the John Cummings house, which was the house later was called the Seabury House, and then it was called the Szymanski House. So most of you are too young to remember the Seabury House or the Cummings House, but you might remember the Szymanski House because Mike Szymanski ran a garage in Smith Mills and had his own reputation. Which I won't go into, but John Cummings was one of the three sons of Benjamin, and they, for quite a period of time, owned and operated Smith Mills, and made Smith Mills kind of the center of old Dartmouth, because people came from everywhere to shop here, and they had mills operating, making all kinds of things, trucking it down to the docks in New Bedford for whaling business and so forth. And while they had their property separate from each other, all these enterprises were operated in cooperation. So these brothers and the father all worked together. There were 4 mills and 2 stores, which were practically under one management. Became an important center of trade. People from New Bedford found an advantage in buying at the Cummings store. Under such conditions, these men were prosperous and accumulated fortunes that were large for those days. You can find that is on our website, that Smith Mills sketch by Henry Worth is available on our website. It's one of the collections of the New Bedford Whaling Museum. Next slide, Don. Well, the Cummings started accumulating property. The original Benjamin Cummings came in before 1800 and started, but then his sons became of age and they started accumulating stuff. And the property that the house is on, the Cummings house is on, got purchased from other people and became John Cummings' house. When he died, his widow was Elizabeth Cummings. By the way, they had 11 children in that house. And she kept it until 1874 when she sold it to Phoebe Seabury, wife of Warren Seabury. So that's sort of the track of the house. Next slide, Don. During the active years of their career, these men owned 4 mills and 2 stores, besides a lot of real estate. John Cummings owned the property. It's now the Country Club in New Bedford as a farm. And they own properties up and down Hicksville Road and Tucker Road and so forth. So next slide. Just to give you an idea what kind of stuff they sold in the store. I'm not going to read all that, but kind of fancy stuff. You know, Canton crepe, Waterloo crepe, Leghorn bonnets, handkerchiefs, silk lace, linen cambric, bobbet and silk lace, merino cashmere shawls, all kinds of fancy things. Next slide, John. Also, John became the postmaster. Always handy to have the business coming into your store if you're a postmaster. That's 1826. This is a clipping from a newspaper. Okay, next slide. So here we are in 1858, and we've seen this map before, but there's J. Cummings, Granite Mill, J. Cummings, store, B.T. Cummings, store, W. Cummings. Anyway you look, there Cummings. Okay, next slide. Oh, back one, Don. Just go backwards one. There's the Cummings farm. I told you, John Cummings owned the country club. That's Hathaway Road.
Would you say that these Cummings family was a descendant of Philip?
They're great-grandsons of Philip. Yeah. Yep. I have the genealogy. Sometime I'll publish that. Next slide. This is what John Cummings looked like when he was a fairly young man. And he lived in that house, which was across the street from the stone grist mill, which he had built. And east of where his house was, east being toward the country club, was a general country grocery store that he owned and conducted. It's just east of the big stone house. Next slide. Again, another map, another year. I won't dwell on that. Go ahead. Next slide, Don. Okay, this is 1871. You can see things a little different. John Cummings is dead now, so Mrs. Cummings owns, this is where the house was. Notice the pond. The pond was dammed up so you could get power. That's like a big battery storing the power, the energy in the pond. And this is the west outlet right there. This is the east outlet. This is Cummings' house. There were other outbuildings of the Cummings farm here and here. And Mrs. Cummings owned a lot where the Christian church was. This is the house we're going to talk about after this one. This is the Edward Tucker house. That was right there. Okay, next slide, please. Yep.
Was there only one mill working there?
One what?
One mill? One mill.
No, there were many mills there.
Okay, I didn't.
No, there were many mills. There's grist mill, saw mill, textile mill, fulling mill. Would I say grist mill? There are 4 or 5 mills.
All at one time?
Yeah, that's what they say.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Now this is the 1895 map, and again to kind of show you what we know about the house. Now it's owned by Warren Seabury, Phoebe's husband. Phoebe really owned it, but she let him put his name on it. You know how that goes, right? And the mill pond is here. There's a little island in the mill pond. The outlets are here. This is the corn crib. This corn crib is over the flume. This is called the flume, the outlet of the pond. As we learn later on from some stuff I'll show you, that's a corn crib that spans the flume. Then these are summer houses over here. Each of those, there's a little bridge that goes over to here, and these are on the bridge. And this is the church, the Baptist church. You see again, it says Baptist church there. Okay, next slide. This is what it actually looked like. Now, all these words and stuff, but this is what the house looked like. And that's right there is where the water comes under the road, right there. So this is on this side of the flume. There's another outlet of the pond that comes over here. These people obviously have been out in a boat, and the pond was big enough to go rowing on. And these are the Jacobsons that ran the Jacobson store. And they had been on an outing and sent a nice picture that described, this is a conservatory on the east side of the house. There's a porch on the west side. There's a big L in the back and a big barn in the back that it shows on that last drawing. Donald, would you go back one, please? See, these are barns back here. This is a corn crib, and these are barns. All these buildings with X's in them are not dwellings. This is the dwelling. These are the outbuildings. That's the way they made the 1895 map. Okay, next, go two more. Okay. Between 23 and 29, well, we already saw that. Next slide. Should have gotten rid of that. There's another picture of that house. It was really an elegant house. And the L, you can kind of see the L through the trees there. It's the L. And this is the porch on the western side. And this is going down the hill. You know this was taken after 1893, this picture, because the tracks are there. The railroad came through there, the trolley came through there in 1893. What's that? Go back to the map, please. One more. One more. Yeah, see, here's the tracks.
Hicksville Road?
Yeah, Hicksville Road. Hicksville Road.
Actually, it's changed now, it's Mall Road or something there.
Yeah, they got another name, but this is what they traditionally have been calling the Four Corners. The truth is, what we call the state road used to be called the road to Smith Mills, and it stopped at Smith Mills. You could go right or you could go left.
And then later it was called Kempton Street.
Right, later it was called Kempton Street. But, and then they extended out to Westport Factory and so on. But
Does the moving, the planned future moving of Tucker Road over to Hathaway Road affect any of these things?
won't affect these here, but it will affect Tucker Road. Yeah, it'll affect quite a few residences on Tucker Road. Okay, next, so go forward. Okay, whoop, no, that's all right. We don't have to look. These are ads giving you an idea of what stores did in those days in Smith Mills. John Cummings got a shipment in of seasonable goods, among them scarlet and black merino shawls. I have no idea what brochy, cashmere, Rob Roy and Highland shawls. That's ditto. The common use of the language, instead of repeating the word shawl, they said ditto. English and French merinos, English, French, and American prints, hosiery, muslins, lawns, etc. Smith Mills, Dartmouth, 9th month, 19. Next slide, please. Okay, one of my best sources, a guy named Lawrence Belding Cummings, wrote a 3-volume Cummings family history. 3 volumes. It's just that much material. And it's in typescript form. It's not published. But you can get a copy of the typescript if you want to, and I have, of course. And I'm going to quote a little bit from here because it's so eloquent, and he can do it better than I can. In May of 1830, John embarked on his own career in business when he bought his brother William's interest in the store. For a while it was John and William Cummings store. Now it's all John's. With the land and buildings on the north side of the highway in Smith Mills. North side of the highway, that's where the pond is. From the corner, eastward almost to the river, and northward to the mill pond. So you get an idea where that's from Hicksville Road over to the river and north to the pond. So that's piece of land. Soon after this purchase, John erected 2 buildings which were important landmarks in his life. One his home, the other his new store. Those were right next to each other. It's likely he built the house first, for he needed it at once for his increasing family, and the existing store which could serve for a while longer. Because he had another store, an older store. He built this one as a newer store. Next slide. This is what he looked like in older age. Next slide. The house which he built, his home for the rest of his life and the birthplace of most of his children, still stands in 1908 on the north side of the road, on the east side of the west outlet of the pond, the mill race, or sawmill privilege. That water was the energy that pushed the sawmill, which was across the street. What we know as this Hawes sawmill. Before that was the Smith sawmill and so forth. Next slide. This is a picture in the Cummings typescript, which is available in the New Bedford Whaling Museum. And I took a picture with my phone and did this. It's not a very good picture, but 11 kids. One of them was the father of John, the guy who wrote this 3-volume thing. Next slide. Now, describing the house. This is what I really wanted to save for you. It's a spacious frame house, squarely built, 2 stories high, with an extensive L in the rear. then painted white with green, in those days, painted white with green shutters. It had the typical arrangement of a central hall, with 2 large rooms on each side, and a tall staircase curving to the hall and chamber up above. It was a pretty elegant house. A porch ran along the western side, that's the Hicksville Road side, and a conservatory extended from the eastern room, that's toward the country club. Next slide, please. When it was built, before the country road was wide, they also called Kempton Street the country road, was widened into the present. Now Belding Cummings wrote this 3 volumes in 1952, so I want to reference that when I say now. I want you to know when now was. The roaring concrete highway lopping off the front yard. It was set well back from the road behind an iron fence. A driveway ran from the road along the east side of the house, that's the country club side, curving in a circle behind it to the barn that stood near the edge of the pond. So in those days, the pond sat back from the road, and the raceways came down, and this barn was up on the edge of the pond. Okay, next slide, please. The mill race was walled. Now he's talking about where the water came through, with massive stones. Near the barn, the corn crib spanned the stream. I showed you that in the map, or the picture. And east of the house, 2 stone bridges, each bearing a summer house. I'm not too sure what a summer house. I think it had lattice work, and the wind blew through it, and no heat. Certainly no heat. Led to the corner lot where John's famous flower garden bloomed under the care of Jonathan Maxfield. Those Maxfields were everywhere in Smith Mills, Donald. Next slide, please. The furnishings of the house were in the Victorian taste. I did all the underlining and emphasizing. This was not done that way in the book. Some pieces of the west parlor have survived, gracefully curved mahogany and stamped crimson velvet, and one sturdy dining room chair that could have been modeled by Duncan Fife. Brass andirons and the lovely blue of the Staffordshire china gave color. The silverware was heavy and of simple design. Little is left. Even the cradle in which each of the 11 children was rocked has gone. The whole thing, the house is gone, everything's gone. Next slide. Back one. Okay, the 3 brothers, by 1874, the 3 brothers and the sister, the brothers had a sister who lived with her brother William, and they lived in that yellow house on the corner of Chase Road and Old Westport Road at that time. And all the real estate in Smith Mills was sold, and the name Cummings, associated with the village for 75 years, disappeared from its role. So not just the houses that are gone, the family's gone too. Next slide. Again, you know about the mill. We looked at that before. Next slide. Gones and gones again. Progress, 1970. Okay, that's the first of the houses we're going to do in depth. Now we're going to have a swig. Okay, I'll rush through this. Okay, this is the Edward Tucker house, which has a history before Edward Tucker and after Edward Tucker. But this is right above the corner, heading out towards Chase Road. This is Old Westport Road heading towards Chase Road. Yeah, I think it was, that's why I hesitate on what to call it, because I don't know what to call it. But this is the house that has quite a history, and we'll be getting into that. Go ahead, next slide. Okay, the estate next south of the meeting house, that's the Baptist meeting house, Christian meeting house, was the homestead of the late Edward Tucker. Originally part of the Elisha Smith farm, Elisha Smith Mills, right, named for him, and in 1717 was sold to Adam Mott, who built thereon a house. So that I don't think that house was built in 1717. That was there in that picture, but there was a house on that lot in 1717, according to this. In 1773, Thomas Mott, who was a son of Adam Mott, sold it to John Smith. 1801, he sold it to Jacob Anthony, and then by intermediate deeds to the Packards. We know the Packards folded up, and it ended up with Luthen Potter, and he sold it to Edward Tucker. And I checked all those out, and these are the details. And this is Bristol County Land Records, Volume 13, page 557. It says what Worth said, only I have a little more detail. And Elisha Smith was a weaver. Adam Mott was a blacksmith, and so forth. In 1773, Thomas Mott to John Smith, 105 pounds lawful money. It's John Smith II, that goes with this. 1 acre and 30 rods on the west side of the road. Also some land across the road with all the appurtenances which I got by inheritance. So he got it from his father's will. There was no deed. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, there's another view of it, a little expanded view, give you an idea. This is the building that originally the Hawes Sawmill was in. This is sequentially, this was the Thatcher store, the Jacobson store, the Connie hardware store, and Gonzo. There's another one that's gone. And this is the Edward Tucker House, also known later on as the Clarence Wheaton House.
You can take the picture of the Christian church and put it right on the right.
Yeah, the Christian church is right on this side of it. As a matter of fact,
What does it say on the barn over there?
what it says, suits, somebody was selling suits or something.
Oh, okay.
The word suit.
Chase Road.
Yeah, that's Chase Road. This is the Abner Potter House, I think.
But it's,
Called Old Westport Road.
it is
Yeah,
now
yeah.
Westport, but it used to be Chase.
Yeah,
That started
yeah.
with that.
It's had a few changes of names. And once it was the way to the head of Westport River at one time. That was the name of the road. So, it says Chase Road right here, as a matter of fact. Next slide, please. Now, we won't go into more deeds. Well, leave it, let me just say that what Henry Worth says is worth checking, and it checks out. I checked it. And most of what he says is quite true. Okay. In 1899, sometime after 1899, this house was acquired by the Clarence A. Wheaton family. And we'll be talking about that from now on for a while. Go ahead. Next slide. The Wheaton family, you may have heard of, ran a company known as Hiram Wheaton and Sons, and they distributed beer, wine, soda water, and all kinds of things. I was going to bring I have a box of their stuff, but they delivered their beer with oxen. See the what's that?
Instead of Clydesdales, huh?
That was they were before the Clydesdales. They had it right. This is in the south end of New Bedford. This particular picture. Next slide, please. There's a little. Now they also delivered with horse teams, and look at those. I have one of those crates. So those are wooden boxes, and I have one, and it's kind of a collector's item. This is Clarence. This is Arthur Clarence Wheaton. He had a son, Clarence Arthur Wheaton, which I always confuse. Next slide, please. A couple of ads to give you an idea. Fine old imported ports and sherries. Hiram Wheaton and Son. Hiram Wheaton came from Seekonk area in Swansea to this area. Got in business with a guy named Brownell. Had a whole bunch of formulas for doing things. He did, I forget which one did all the work. One did all the work, and one had the formulas, and they had a good partnership and made a lot of money. But the, there you go, the telephone number. They're down on School Street in New Bedford. And this is an 1895 newspaper ad. As in many, many families, one generation, what does it say, 3 generations, shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves? What's the saying? Anyway, that happened in lots of families. Next slide. They also sold imported beer. And you can see this is a pretty nice looking ad. Next slide. And soda water was one of the more famous products that seemed to last. I used to serve Wheaton's soda at Pascomanset Links. Kept it in a cold water cooler where it drips and you take the top off and hand it out. And I used to lug the cases up from the basement. But the Wheatons were Smith Mills Company. Pascomanset Links, the Hawes were Smith Mills Company. They helped each other out. Next slide, please. And this is Arthur Clarence. He's the son of Hiram. And he had, his wife was Mary Mackham McKean. We have a lot of genealogy also. and he's the father of Clarence Arthur and Edna and Arthur Clarence, and his wife was Anna Adams Cotting. Okay, next slide. He was quite a dude, by the way, if you don't think so. That picture would show you. This is going to play a role in our story. This is the barn at this estate. This barn right here in the middle of Smith Mills. And the big house was over here. This is the back of a house that faced State Road, this little thing right here. But the big house is over here. Next slide will show you the big house. And these are just some scenes in the barnyard. These are some of the sons of Clarence. These boys are sons and brother-in-law, and some goats and other animals. Next slide, please. More, I think I already showed you that. Next slide. These are boys with their toys next to the house. This is what the side of the house looked like. This was actually motorized, I believe, and this was not. But this is Clarence Wheaton himself with that hat on. He's a friend of mine's grandfather. That's why we have so many good pictures of him. Next slide, please. And this is what the house looked like. I showed you the barn was over here, but this is the house. There's stone walls. It was a big piece of land, like 5 acres of land right there in the middle of Smith Mills. Next slide. Now, unfortunately, in 1913, there's a big fire at Smith Mills. It was a barn fire. The barn that we just showed you caught fire, and 5 horses, they were pacers, race horses, were killed in the fire. And a lot of the neighbors came to help with the fire, and they did contain the fire, and they did not lose the barn, but they lost some horses, and some people got some burns and some injuries. But you can see this is a newspaper picture of that was published in the paper, and I'm not sure which paper this was at the moment. Next slide, Don. This is one of the horses that got killed, and that's Clarence Wheaton. If you don't know this, there used to be a racetrack where the airport is now, and they used to run paces over there. And we have some trophies that he won, racing his horses, and it was quite a guy. And he had some, they call it the Dandelion Stables. What were the name of the 2 horses? Dandelion Girl, Dandelion Boy. You know. Next slide, please. This is the backyard looking across where the golf course eventually was built. This is all very open land. This is Doris Davies. Anybody know Doris Davenport? People know her. That's where she lived. And this was a field where some teenagers used to play softball back in the early 50s, late 40s. You know, one of the teenagers is here, and here's another one, and several others. Next slide, please. This is a picture of the barn and the house and some of the gardens and stone walls and so on at Smith Mills. Next slide. And I guess we can't, but this just shows it on the map. You can see it's that pretty good sized piece of land.
There's a brook that runs right under there, too.
Yeah, that was the brook that the tannery, that they ran a tannery off that brook, which was just south of that land. Some kids used to put little boats in it. They'd sail them down to the Pascamanset, right? Right. Okay. I got all the inside stories, but go ahead. Next slide. Okay. Now, why I call this house star-crossed. Okay. Now this is in the year 1926. Fatally hurt when milk trucks collide. Clarence A. Wheaton of Smith Mills, Dartmouth, died at noon today. Injuries received when he was struck by a motor truck on Liberty Street, New Bedford, right near Keene Street. He was standing on the back steps of a milk wagon. He was still delivering milk with a horse and wagon. And when a truck came suddenly around the corner, ran into the wagon. Mr. Wheat was employed by Levi King, whose wife was a Hawes. The truck which ran into him is owned by Victor W. Gibbs was driven by Anton L. Sequeira of Mattapoisett. Mr. Wheaton was 42 years old and is survived by a widow and 7 children. Pretty tragic event. The whole story, there's other reports that I've read, other newspaper reports and stuff, and to cut to the chase, Mr. Sequeira and Mr. Wheaton had milk routes that crisscrossed each other in the west end of New Bedford. When you're delivering milk at 3:30 in the morning, there's not much going on except you and the other milk guy. And so they had some kind of a game going where they would block each other's way, and as they went around the corner, one would get ahead of the other and so forth. And in the case where Mr. Wheaton with his milk wagon blocked the way for Mr. Sequeira was delivering milk with a truck. And the truck was kind of an old-fashioned truck because that was kind of a new thing in those days. And he was going to make fun of, he was going to scare his friend, Mr. Wheaton. So he sped up and he was going to jam his brakes on. But the brakes didn't work. Slammed into the back of the milk wagon, pinned Mr. Wheaton between the wagon and the truck, killed him. He didn't die right then. They brought him to Smith Mills. He died later at Smith Mills. One of his sons witnessed this. He was working with him. Very tragic thing. His son probably never got over it from other accounts that we have of the family. So a very, very tragic thing. So that's the second tragic thing that happened in that house. Next slide, please. This is Clarence Wheaton before he died. He was, you haven't seen his mother's picture, but he looks more like his mother than his father. You saw his father's picture, big tall guy with the goatee and stuff. This is Clarence Wheaton. Some of his sons look like him. They had that rugged build. Next slide, please. Now, this is a unique finding. Later, after the Wheatons left that house, when she was a widow, she moved in with her daughter in a house nearby, and some of her sons moved in with them, with the family. The house, which we call the Tucker House, was rented to a family named Silverman. And this is a picture of Mrs. Silverman and her daughter, Suzanne Carroll. Her name is Suzanne Carroll Silverman. Taken up in New York State before they moved to Dartmouth. I just happened to find this. You know, when you get to be a sleuth on the computer, you find all kinds of stuff. So even when you're looking for it, you find it. Sometimes when you're not looking for it, you find it. But I found this when I was looking for it. And next slide, please. This is what this girl looked like when she was a young teenager. Well, as the story goes, Eleanor's not here tonight. She was planning to be here, but she's not here. Eleanor was a good friend of this girl, and Eleanor came from her bicycle where she lived up near the old King Farm, Cummings house, Philip Cummings' house. She came down to Smith Mills to visit a friend, but nobody was home. So she went back and had a conversation with her mother. I don't know, they're not home. This girl was also, she summered down at on Westport on the river. She visited Carol at the river. So Carol had, this is a picture Carol had of this girl. Well, unfortunately, what happened the day that Eleanor tried to visit her friend, Carol, she called her Carol Silverman, even though her full name was Suzanne Carol Silverman. Here's Carol Silverman. What happened, as the story goes, and I don't know, this is hearsay, okay, but this girl was at Dartmouth High School. She had been invited to the prom by some guy named Gifford or Macumber or something like that. And her mother really didn't like it. We knew that much. And then later in the day, Eleanor found out what happened. And what happened was that Mrs. Silverman stabbed Carol to death with a knife and then put the knife in her own heart. So it was a murder-suicide in that house. So that's why I call it the Star-Crossed House. 3 different tragic happenings. On top of that, a widow with 7 kids to bring up. It's a pretty tragic, tough situation. And it's part of the history of Dartmouth. The house is not there anymore, but that's quite a story. You won't forget that story, I don't think. Next slide. Okay, these are the three events. The major fire with injuries and lost resources in 1913. A work accident leaving a widow and 7 children in 1924. The murder of the teenage daughter and suicide in 1954. So, very sad tale, but it is part of the history of the house. Next slide, please. That's it. Sorry, we have refreshments. Needless to say, you have no idea how much I cut out of this. But it's just, there's just so much material about Dartmouth that we have available. And it really is a pleasure to be able to put it together and show it and share it, because a lot of this is, I think, it's significant history, and it's certainly memorable history. Smith Mills, many of us believe, is the oldest part of Old Dartmouth. It's certainly a central part of Old Dartmouth. That's why the townhouse was originally in Smith Mills. And it's become a great crossroads, and commercial center for sure, but it certainly has changed. We don't have very much left of the gracious old village that we had. We have a few remnants. It's a little bit sad, really, to, I still go back to that gone but not forgotten thing, and there's still a few things hanging on, but even those are kind of iffy. The Weaver House on the campus is still iffy. The little schoolhouse is iffy. The Cummings house is still. The Goodwin House. One of the houses I did not mention, remember, this is selected houses. The house that sits way in the back off of State Road, it's called, Carol just reminded me, it's called the Goodwin House, but that has a long history. That's like a 1725 house. And it's up for sale now, and it's probably going to disappear. It's going to be gone, so hopefully we can do something to at least delay it. But there are no teeth in the commission ordinances that we have available.